Michael Adams stood in his driveway, admiring the sleek red Ferrari he had worked so hard to own. The car was more than just a vehicle to him, it was a symbol of his success, a testament to the years of dedication and hustle it had taken to build his business. But now, it was time to let it go. He had listed the car online, and the responses had been pouring in. As he polished the hood one last time, he noticed his neighbor, Leslie Whitaker, staring at the car from across the street. Leslie was someone Michael had tried to avoid. She had a reputation for being nosy and confrontational, and their few interactions had always left a bad taste in his mouth. Today, however, she seemed particularly fixated on the Ferrari. Before Michael could retreat inside, Leslie marched over, her arms crossed and her expression tight. "That's quite a car you've got there," she said, her tone dripping with faux sweetness. "Thanks," Michael replied cautiously. "I'm actually selling it." Leslie's eyes lit up, but not in a friendly way. "Selling it? Well, I'll take it off your hands. How about $20,000? Michael blinked, taken aback. The Ferrari was worth 10 times that amount. "I'm sorry, but I'm looking to get market value for it. It's listed for $200,000. Leslie scoffed, her face twisting into a sneer. $200,000? That's ridiculous. You don't need that kind of money. Besides, a car like that is too much for someone like you." Michael felt a surge of anger but kept his voice calm. "Someone like me? What's that supposed to mean?" Leslie waved a hand dismissively. "You know what I mean. A car like that should belong to someone who appreciates it, not someone who's just showing off." Michael took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. "I've worked hard for everything I have, including this car. I'm not selling it for less than it's worth." Leslie's face turned red, and she stepped closer, her voice rising. "You're being ungrateful and arrogant. I'm trying to help you out, and this is how you treat me?" Michael held his ground. "I don't need your help. This is my car, and I'll sell it on my terms." Leslie's eyes narrowed, and she pulled out her phone. "We'll see about that," she snapped before dialing 911. "There's a suspicious black man here trying to sell a stolen car. He's being very aggressive, and I'm scared for my safety." Michael shook his head in disbelief. He pulled out his own phone and began recording, determined to document the encounter. He knew how this would look to the police, and he wasn't about to let Leslie's lies go unchallenged. The police arrived within minutes, their sirens blaring as they pulled up to Michael's driveway. 2 officers stepped out of the car, their eyes immediately locking onto Michael. Leslie rushed toward them, pointing at Michael with exaggerated urgency. "That's him!" she exclaimed. "He's been threatening me and trying to sell a stolen car. I don't feel safe." The officers approached Michael, their hands resting on their belts. "Sir, we need you to step back," one of them said, his tone firm. Michael complied, raising his hands slightly to show he wasn't a threat. "I'm not trespassing," he explained calmly. "This is my property. I was trying to sell my car when she approached me, demanding to buy it for way less than it's worth. When I refused, she called you guys." Leslie scoffed. "That's a lie. He's just trying to cause trouble." The officers glanced at each other, clearly unsure who to believe. "Do you have any proof of ownership?" the female officer asked Michael. "Yes," Michael said, pulling out a folder from his car. "Here's the title, registration, and purchase documents. You can also check the VIN number if you need to." The officers reviewed the documents carefully, their expressions shifting as they realized Leslie's claims were baseless. "Ma'am," the male officer said, turning to Leslie, "it appears he does own this vehicle. There's no evidence of theft." Leslie's face turned red. "That doesn't mean he wasn't being aggressive. He was yelling at me and making me feel unsafe." The officers hesitated, their training and biases kicking in. Despite the evidence, they still seemed inclined to give Leslie the benefit of the doubt. "Sir," the female officer said to Michael, "we're going to need to ask you a few more questions, just to clear this up." Michael nodded, though he couldn't help but feel the sting of injustice. Even with proof, he was still being treated like a suspect. As the officers continued their questioning, a small crowd of neighbors began to gather. Some whispered to each other, while others pulled out their phones to record the scene. Michael noticed a few sympathetic glances, but most of the onlookers seemed unsure what to make of the situation. He knew this wasn't over. Leslie's false accusations had put him in a position he didn't deserve to be in, and the officer's lingering suspicion only added to the frustration. But Michael also knew he had the truth on his side, and he wasn't about to let Leslie get away with this. As the sun beat down on the quiet street, Michael made a silent promise to himself. He wasn't just going to defend his property. He was going to make sure Leslie faced the consequences of her actions. And he had a feeling he wasn't the only one who had something to hide. After the police left and the crowd dispersed, Michael retreated to his home, his mind racing. The encounter with Leslie had left him shaken, not just because of her blatant racism, but because of the way the officers had treated him despite his innocence. He knew he couldn't let this slide. If Leslie felt emboldened enough to call the police on him for selling his own car, who else had she targeted? And what else was she hiding? Determined to find answers, Michael sat down at his computer and began digging. He started with public records, searching for any information about Leslie Whitaker. It didn't take long to find what he was looking for. Leslie had multiple DUIs on her record, and her driver's license had been suspended. Yet she had been driving around the neighborhood as if nothing was wrong. Michael shook his head in disbelief. This woman had the audacity to accuse him of wrongdoing while breaking the law herself. But Michael didn't stop there. He dug deeper, searching for any news articles or social media posts about Leslie. He discovered that she had a history of targeting black neighbors, often calling the police on them for trivial reasons. One family had moved away after Leslie falsely accused their teenage son of stealing packages from her porch. Another neighbor had been harassed for hosting too many guests at a barbecue. Michael's stomach turned as he read through the stories. Leslie wasn't just racist, she was a serial abuser of her privilege. Michael's investigation took a dramatic turn when he stumbled upon a thread in a local online forum. A former friend of Leslie's had posted about her obsession with luxury cars. According to the post, Leslie would borrow or rent high-end vehicles to show off at night, driving around town to impress her friends and post photos on social media. The kicker? She had been doing this despite her suspended license. Michael leaned back in his chair, his heart pounding. He had expected to find some dirt on Leslie, but he hadn't anticipated uncovering something this big. She wasn't just a racist, she was a criminal. And now, Michael had the power to hold her accountable. Michael knew he had to be careful. If he confronted Leslie directly, she could twist the narrative or even retaliate. Instead, he decided to let the truth speak for itself. He compiled all the evidence he had gathered, records of her DUIs, screenshots of her social media posts showing her driving luxury cars, and testimonials from neighbors she had targeted, and sent it anonymously to local news outlets and social justice organizations. Within days, the story exploded. A local journalist picked it up, publishing an exposé that detailed Leslie's history of racism, her DUIs, and her illegal driving. The article included links to the videos of the confrontation, which had already been circulating online. People were outraged. Leslie's face was everywhere, her name synonymous with entitlement and hypocrisy. The backlash was swift. Leslie's social media accounts were flooded with angry comments, and she deactivated them in a futile attempt to escape the backlash. Her friends, many of whom had tolerated her behavior for years, began distancing themselves from her. One former friend even came forward, admitting that Leslie had borrowed her car multiple times despite knowing her license was suspended. As the pressure mounted, authorities took notice. The local police department announced an investigation into Leslie's illegal driving, citing the evidence Michael had uncovered. Reporters camped outside her house, demanding answers, but Leslie refused to speak to them. Her once pristine reputation was in shambles, and she had no one to blame but herself. Elijah watched it all unfold from the sidelines, a quiet sense of satisfaction settling over him. He hadn't done this for revenge. He had done it because it was the right thing to do. Leslie had tried to use her privilege to intimidate him, but in the end, she had only exposed herself. The story became a rallying cry for racial justice in the community. Activists organized protests outside Leslie's home, calling for accountability and systemic change. Michael's experience was held up as an example of the everyday racism Black people face, even in their own neighborhoods. Leslie, meanwhile, was left to face the consequences of her actions. Her probation was revoked, and she was arrested for driving with a suspended license. For the first time in her life, she was the one being judged, and she didn't like how it felt. Michael knew this wasn't the end of the fight, but it was a start. By standing up for himself and exposing Leslie's lies, he had sparked a conversation that needed to happen. And he wasn't done yet. Leslie Whitaker's life unraveled quickly. The exposé about her DUIs, illegal driving, and racist behavior had turned her into a pariah. Her once respected name was now synonymous with entitlement and hypocrisy. The community she had lived in for years turned its back on her, and her social circle evaporated overnight. Her attempts to defend herself on social media only made things worse, as people flooded her posts with screenshots of her racist comments and evidence of her crimes. The legal consequences were even more devastating. Leslie's probation was revoked, and she was arrested for driving with a suspended license. Her multiple DUIs and history of violating the law worked against her, and she was sentenced to jail time. The woman who had once felt untouchable was now facing the harsh reality of her actions. Desperate to salvage what little remained of her reputation, Leslie reached out to Michael. She sent him a lengthy email, filled with half-hearted apologies and excuses. She claimed she had been misunderstood, and that her actions were the result of stress and personal struggles. She even offered to donate to a racial justice organization in his name, as if money could erase the harm she had caused. Michael read the email with a mix of anger and disbelief. He didn't respond immediately, taking time to carefully craft his reply. When he finally did, his message was clear and unyielding. "Your actions weren't a misunderstanding," he wrote. "They were rooted in deep-seated racism and a sense of entitlement. You called the police on me because you assumed I didn't belong in my own neighborhood. You treated me like a criminal for no reason other than the color of my skin. An apology won't fix that. The only way to make things right is to face the consequences of your actions and commit to real change, not just for me, but for everyone you've hurt." Leslie never replied. Meanwhile, Michael found himself thrust into the spotlight. His calm demeanor during the confrontation and his relentless pursuit of justice had made him a local hero. He was invited to speak at community meetings, schools, and even city council sessions. He used these platforms to share his story and highlight the dangers of racial profiling and false accusations. "This isn't just about me," he told a crowd at a town hall meeting. "This is about every person of color who's been made to feel like they don't belong. It's about every time someone calls the police on a Black person for simply existing. We have to do better. We have to hold people accountable." His words resonated, and soon, Michael became a leading voice for racial justice in his community. Inspired by the support he had received, Michael decided to take his advocacy a step further. He organized a community event called Driving Change, aimed at fostering dialogue and understanding among residents. He invited neighbors, local leaders, activists, and even law enforcement to participate. The event featured workshops on racial bias, panel discussions about systemic racism, and storytelling sessions where people could share their experiences. The turnout was overwhelming. Hundreds of people showed up, many of them white residents who had never before engaged in conversations about race. Michael opened the event with a powerful speech, recounting his own experience and urging others to stand up against injustice. "Change starts with us," he said. "It starts with having these hard conversations, with listening to each other, and with holding ourselves accountable. We can't let fear and prejudice divide us. We have to come together as a community and fight for what's right." The event was a success, sparking meaningful conversations and inspiring many attendees to take action. Several residents formed a neighborhood watch group focused on combating racial profiling, while others pledged to support Black-owned businesses and advocate for policy changes at the local level. Leslie, however, was notably absent. She had been invited, but Michael wasn't surprised when she didn't show up. He had heard through the grapevine that she had moved to a different town, hoping to escape the fallout from her actions. Whether she had truly learned from her mistakes, or was simply running away from them remained unclear. For Michael, though, Leslie's absence didn't matter. This event wasn't about her, it was about building a better future. As he looked out at the diverse crowd, he felt a sense of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. In the weeks that followed, Michael continued his work as an advocate, partnering with local organizations to push for systemic change. His story inspired others to speak out against racial injustice, turning a negative experience into a catalyst for positive change. The confrontation over the Ferrari had been a turning point, not just for Michael, but for the entire community. It was a reminder that racism thrives in silence, and that the only way to defeat it is to confront it head-on. And Michael was determined to keep fighting, one conversation at a time.